Ladies and gentlemen, I want to talk to you today about one of the most fundamental principles that will determine the quality of your life, the depth of your relationships, and the height of your achievements. It's a principle so powerful that when you finally grasp it, everything changes. When you truly understand it, you'll never see yourself the same way again. And that principle is this: knowing your worth. Now let me ask you something. How much time have you spent calculating your financial worth, your net worth? How many of you have sat down with spreadsheets and calculators, adding up your assets, subtracting your liabilities, trying to figure out where you stand financially? Most people do this at least once a year, some do it quarterly, and the really sophisticated folks do it monthly. But here's my question. When was the last time you calculated your personal worth? When was the last time you sat down and really took inventory of who you are, what you bring to the table, what makes you valuable beyond the dollars in your bank account? See, most people go through life seriously underestimating themselves. They've bought into someone else's evaluation of who they are. Maybe it was a parent who didn't know any better, a teacher who was having a bad day, a boss who was threatened by their potential, or a society that tries to keep everyone in neat little boxes. And they've accepted that evaluation as truth. They've internalized it, they've made it their reality. But here's what I've learned in all my years of studying success, studying failure, studying human potential. Your worth is not determined by someone else's inability to see your value. Let me say that again because it's critical. Your worth is not determined by someone else's inability to see your value. Just because someone can't see the diamond doesn't mean you're not a diamond, it just means they're not a jeweler. Think about this for a moment. A $20 bill has the same value whether it's crisp and new or whether it's been crumpled up, stepped on, and dragged through the mud. Its value doesn't change based on how it's been treated. Its value is intrinsic. It's built in. It's inherent. And the same is true for you. Your worth doesn't diminish because someone mistreated you. Your value doesn't decrease because someone failed to appreciate you. Your significance doesn't evaporate because someone walked away from you. But here's where most people get it wrong. They wait for external validation to determine their internal value. They wait for the promotion to feel worthy. They wait for the relationship to feel lovable. They wait for the recognition to feel significant. They've handed over the power to determine their worth to people who may not even know their own worth. That's like asking a blind man to appraise a painting. It doesn't make sense. Now, I'm not suggesting that we should be arrogant or that we should develop an inflated sense of self-importance. That's not what I'm talking about at all. What I'm talking about is an honest, accurate assessment of your value. I'm talking about recognizing that you were born with inherent worth, that you possess unique talents and abilities, that you have something to contribute that no one else can contribute quite the same way. Let me tell you something about uniqueness. There are over 8 billion people on this planet, and not one of them has your exact combination of experiences, perspectives, talents, and insights. Not one. You are literally 1 in 8 billion. Think about those odds. You are more rare than the finest diamond, more unique than the most exotic flower, more valuable than you've ever dared to imagine. But you'll never cash in on that uniqueness. You'll never capitalize on that rarity until you first recognize it exists. Here's what happens when you don't know your worth. You settle. You settle for relationships that drain you instead of energize you. You settle for jobs that use you instead of develop you. You settle for opportunities that are beneath your capability instead of challenging you to grow. You settle for crumbs when you could have the whole bakery. And why? Because somewhere along the way, you convinced yourself that crumbs were all you deserved. I've watched this happen over and over again. I've seen brilliant people accept mediocre situations because they didn't recognize their own brilliance. I've seen talented individuals work for peanuts because they didn't understand the value of their talents. I've seen capable men and women stay in toxic relationships because they didn't believe they deserved better. And it breaks my heart every single time because I know what's possible when people wake up to their worth. When you know your worth, everything changes. The way you walk changes, the way you talk changes, the way you negotiate changes, the way you set boundaries changes, the way you make decisions changes, because you're no longer operating from a position of scarcity and desperation. You're operating from a position of abundance and confidence. You're not begging for opportunities. You're evaluating whether opportunities are worthy of your time and energy. Let me give you a practical example. 2 people walk into a job interview. They have similar qualifications, similar experience, similar capabilities, but one knows their worth and one doesn't. The one who doesn't know their worth is thinking, please pick me. I hope they like me. I hope I'm good enough. They're coming from a place of need. They're willing to accept whatever is offered because they're just grateful to be considered. But the person who knows their worth, they're thinking something completely different. They're thinking, is this company a good fit for what I bring to the table? Will this position allow me to grow? Is this opportunity aligned with my values and my goals? See the difference? One is begging, the other is evaluating, one is accepting, the other is deciding. And here's what's fascinating. The marketplace always knows. Employers, clients, customers, even friends and romantic partners. They can sense whether you know your worth or not, and they'll treat you according to the value you place on yourself. If you act like you're worth minimum wage, you'll be paid minimum wage. If you act like you're not worthy of respect, you won't receive respect. If you act like you're lucky just to be included, you'll always be treated as an afterthought. But when you know your worth, when you carry yourself with quiet confidence, when you communicate through your actions and your boundaries that you are valuable, the whole world responds differently. Opportunities that were closed suddenly open. People who overlooked you suddenly notice you. Possibilities that seemed out of reach suddenly become accessible. Not because you changed what you have, but because you changed how you see what you have. Now let me address something important. Knowing your worth doesn't mean you're finished developing. It doesn't mean you've arrived. It doesn't mean you don't have room to grow. Some people confuse knowing their worth with being satisfied with where they are. Those are two completely different things. You can recognize your current value while simultaneously working to increase that value. In fact, people who truly know their worth are often the ones who invest the most in their personal development because they understand that they're worth the investment. Think about it this way. If you owned a racehorse worth $1 million, would you feed it cheap feed? Would you skip its veterinary care? Would you neglect its training? Of course not. You'd invest in that horse because you recognize its value. But most people treat themselves worse than they'd treat a $1 million racehorse. They feed themselves junk food, junk entertainment, junk relationships, junk ideas. They skip the care and development they need. They neglect the training that would make them more valuable. And why? Because they don't recognize their own worth. Here's a principle I want you to write down. You will never outperform your self-image. Let me say it again. You will never outperform your self-image. If you see yourself as worth $50,000 a year, you'll find a way to make $50,000 a year. If you see yourself as worthy of a mediocre relationship, you'll find a mediocre relationship. If you see yourself as deserving of an average life, you'll create an average life. Your external results will always mirror your internal beliefs about yourself. So the question becomes, how do you change your self-image? How do you start seeing yourself differently? How do you begin to recognize your worth when you've spent years, maybe decades, undervaluing yourself? It starts with awareness. You have to become aware of the stories you're telling yourself. Every day, all day long, you're running commentary in your head about who you are and what you're capable of. Most people aren't even conscious of this commentary, but it's there, shaping every decision, influencing every action, determining every outcome. You have to start paying attention to that internal dialogue. And when you hear yourself say, I'm not good enough, you have to catch it. When you hear yourself say, I don't deserve that, you have to challenge it. When you hear yourself say, who am I to want more, you have to question it. Because here's the truth. Most of those stories aren't even yours. They're borrowed, they're inherited, they're absorbed from people who didn't know any better or from experiences you misinterpreted. A child who's told they're stupid isn't stupid. They just have a parent who doesn't know how to encourage. A teenager who's rejected isn't unlovable. They just encountered someone who wasn't ready to recognize their value. An adult who's passed over for a promotion isn't incompetent. They just work for a company that can't see their potential. But if you're not careful, you'll take these external events and turn them into internal truths about yourself. The second step is reevaluation. You have to look at the evidence, not the opinions, not the criticisms, not the rejections, the actual evidence. What have you accomplished? What have you overcome? What challenges have you faced and conquered? What value have you created? What problems have you solved? When you really sit down and take inventory, most people are shocked by what they find. They've been so focused on their failures and shortcomings that they've completely overlooked their successes and strengths. I remember working with a woman once who was convinced she had nothing special to offer. She'd spent 20 years as a homemaker, and she believed that because she hadn't worked in a traditional job, she had no valuable skills. So I asked her to tell me about her day. She coordinated schedules for 5 people, managed a household budget, negotiated with contractors, resolved conflicts, planned events, handled medical appointments, maintained important relationships, taught and mentored 2 children, and created a peaceful environment in which everyone could thrive. When I pointed out that she was essentially a project manager, financial analyst, negotiator, counselor, event planner, healthcare coordinator, educator, and culture creator, she started to cry. She'd been doing all of this for 20 years and had never once valued her contributions because they didn't come with a paycheck and a job title. That's what reevaluation does. It helps you see what's really there instead of what you've convinced yourself is there. It helps you recognize the skills you've developed, the wisdom you've gained, the character you've built, the value you've created. And when you start to see yourself accurately, your sense of worth shifts dramatically. The third step is association. You have to surround yourself with people who see your worth, especially when you're still learning to see it yourself. This is critical. If you're trying to build a new self-image, but you're surrounded by people who are invested in your old self-image, you're going to struggle. Some people benefit from you staying small. Some people feel safer when you're operating beneath your potential. Some people's entire sense of self is built on being above you, and they need you to stay below them to maintain their position. You don't have to be mean about it. You don't have to create drama. But you do have to be selective about who gets access to your mind and your heart. You have to be strategic about whose opinions you value. You have to be intentional about whose voices you allow to influence you. Because if you're listening to people who don't see your worth, you'll start to doubt your worth. But if you're learning from people who recognize potential, who celebrate growth, who encourage excellence, you'll start to rise to their expectations. Now, here's something that might surprise you. Sometimes the people who can't see your worth are the people closest to you. It's not because they don't love you. It's because they're comfortable with who you've been and they're threatened by who you're becoming. Growth requires change, and change requires others to adjust, and not everyone is willing to adjust. So they'll try to keep you in the box they've created for you. They'll remind you of your past failures. They'll minimize your current successes. They'll dismiss your future dreams. And if you're not careful, you'll shrink back down to fit their limited vision of who you are. But you can't let that happen. You have to be willing to outgrow people's perceptions of you, even when those people are family members or old friends. You have to be willing to disappoint people who are invested in your limitations. You have to be willing to be misunderstood by people who refuse to see you differently. Because your worth is not up for debate. It's not subject to popular vote. It's not dependent on unanimous agreement. Let me tell you about value and markets. Different markets value different things. A diamond might be worth thousands in one market and nothing in another. But that doesn't change the intrinsic value of the diamond. It just means you're in the wrong market. The same is true for you. If you're in an environment that doesn't value what you bring, that doesn't mean you lack value. It means you're in the wrong environment. It means you need to find a market that appreciates what you offer. I see this all the time in business. Someone is working for a company that undervalues them, underpays them, underutilizes them. They start to believe that's their market value, but then they make a move, they change companies, they shift industries, and suddenly they're valued completely differently. Same person, same skills, same capabilities, different market. The smart ones realize that instead of trying to convince people who don't value them to start valuing them, they find people who already recognize their worth. The same principle applies to relationships. If you're in a relationship where you're constantly trying to prove your worth, where you're always auditioning for love and approval, where you're perpetually working to earn affection that should be freely given, you're in the wrong market. You're trying to sell something valuable to someone who can't afford it or doesn't want it. And the solution isn't to lower your price. The solution is to find someone who recognizes what you're offering and is willing to meet you with equal value. Here's another aspect of knowing your worth that people often miss. It comes with responsibility. When you truly understand your value, when you recognize your potential, when you grasp your significance, you can no longer hide behind excuses. You can no longer blame circumstances. You can no longer play the victim. Because if you're as valuable as you claim to be, then you have a responsibility to do something with that value. You have a responsibility to develop it, to share it, to use it in service of something bigger than yourself. This is where a lot of people get stuck. They want to know their worth so they can feel better about themselves, so they can boost their self-esteem, so they can walk around with more confidence, and those are fine benefits. But knowing your worth is about so much more than feeling good. It's about recognizing that you have something to contribute, something to create, something to give. It's about understanding that the world needs what you have to offer, and if you don't step up and offer it, everyone loses, including you. Think about the talents you have. Think about the experiences that have shaped you. Think about the insights you've gained. Think about the perspective you carry. All of that has value not just for you, but for others. There are people who need what you know. There are problems that need what you can do. There are opportunities waiting for what you can bring. But none of that matters if you're sitting on the sidelines convinced you have nothing to offer. I've seen this pattern over and over again. Someone undervalues themselves, so they hold back. They don't speak up in meetings. They don't pursue opportunities. They don't share their ideas. They don't take risks. They play it safe. They stay small. And then they wonder why life isn't more rewarding, why success isn't coming, why fulfillment is elusive. It's because they've buried their treasure instead of investing it. Jesus told a parable about this. A master gave 3 servants different amounts of money to manage while he was away. 2 of them invested what they were given and doubled it. But one of them buried his in the ground because he was afraid. When the master returned, he praised the 2 who had created value and condemned the one who had played it safe. Why? Because he'd been given something valuable, and instead of using it, he hid it. Instead of developing it, he protected it. Instead of multiplying it, he minimized it. That's what happens when people don't know their worth. They bury their talents, they hide their gifts, they minimize their potential. Not because they're lazy or uncaring, but because they're afraid. They're afraid of failing. They're afraid of criticism. They're afraid of exposure. They're afraid of being seen as arrogant or presumptuous. So they play small, they stay hidden, and they wonder why life feels so unfulfilling. But fulfillment comes from using what you've been given. Purpose comes from contributing what you have to offer. Meaning comes from making a difference with what makes you unique. You can't experience those things while you're hiding. You can't access that depth of satisfaction while you're playing it safe. You have to step out, you have to take risks, you have to be willing to be seen, to be judged, to be evaluated, because on the other side of that vulnerability is the life you actually want. Now let's talk about boundaries, because this is where knowing your worth gets really practical. Boundaries are simply the physical, emotional, and mental limits you establish to protect yourself from being manipulated, used, or violated by others. But most people struggle with boundaries because they don't know their worth. They think setting boundaries is selfish. They think saying no is mean. They think protecting their time and energy makes them a bad person. But here's the truth. Boundaries aren't about being selfish. They're about being responsible. When you set healthy boundaries, you're taking responsibility for your own well-being. You're taking responsibility for the quality of your relationships. You're taking responsibility for how your time and energy are invested. And you can only do that when you believe you're worth protecting. People who don't know their worth let others walk all over them. They say yes when they mean no. They accept behavior they shouldn't tolerate. They give to people who only take. They work for people who exploit them. They stay in situations that damage them. And they do all of this because somewhere deep down they don't believe they deserve better. But when you know your worth, boundaries become natural. You don't struggle with saying no because you understand that your yes has value and shouldn't be given carelessly. You don't struggle with walking away from toxic situations because you understand that your peace is precious and shouldn't be sacrificed unnecessarily. You don't struggle with asking for what you need because you understand that your needs are valid and shouldn't be ignored indefinitely. I want to be clear about something. Setting boundaries will cost you. It will cost you relationships with people who benefited from your lack of boundaries. It will cost you opportunities that required you to compromise your values. It will cost you the approval of people who preferred you weak and accommodating. But what you'll gain is so much more valuable than what you'll lose. You'll gain self-respect. You'll gain authentic relationships. You'll gain opportunities that align with who you truly are. You'll gain the approval of the only person whose approval ultimately matters, yourself. Let's talk about negotiation, because this is another area where knowing your worth makes all the difference. Most people are terrible negotiators because they negotiate from a position of weakness. They're so afraid of losing the opportunity that they accept whatever is offered. They're so grateful to be considered that they don't advocate for themselves. They're so worried about seeming difficult that they settle for less than they deserve. But negotiation isn't about being difficult. It's about being honest. It's about accurately representing the value you bring. It's about ensuring that what you're receiving is commensurate with what you're giving. And you can only do that when you have a clear understanding of your worth. Here's what I've learned about negotiation. The person who cares least about the outcome has the most power. Now, I'm not suggesting you shouldn't care, but I am suggesting that you shouldn't need any particular outcome so desperately that you're willing to accept anything just to get it. When you know your worth, you can walk away from opportunities that don't value you appropriately. You can turn down offers that don't meet your standards. You can wait for the right fit instead of settling for the first fit. This applies to salary negotiations, business deals, relationship discussions, any situation where value is being exchanged. If you don't know what you're worth, you'll accept whatever someone offers. But when you know your worth, you can have an honest conversation about fair exchange. You can say, here's the value I bring, here's what I need in return. If that doesn't work for you, I understand, but I can't move forward on terms that undervalue my contribution. Some people hear that and think it sounds arrogant or demanding, but it's not. It's honest. It's respectful. It's professional. You're not saying you're better than anyone else. You're simply stating the terms under which you're willing to engage. And the right people, the right opportunities, the right situations will meet you there. The wrong ones won't, and that's okay because they weren't meant for you anyway. Now I want to address something that trips a lot of people up: the difference between knowing your worth and comparing yourself to others. These are not the same thing. In fact, they're often opposite. People who don't know their worth are constantly comparing themselves to others, trying to determine where they rank, trying to figure out if they measure up. But people who do know their worth don't need to compare because they understand that their value isn't relative, it's intrinsic. Comparison is the thief of joy. It's also the thief of clarity. When you're constantly measuring yourself against other people, you lose sight of who you actually are. You start trying to be them instead of becoming more fully yourself. You start chasing their definition of success instead of creating your own. You start valuing what they value instead of honoring what you value. Here's what you need to understand. You're not in competition with anyone else. There's no scoreboard. There's no race. There's no ranking system that actually matters. The only person you need to be better than is the person you were yesterday. The only competition that counts is the one between who you are and who you're capable of becoming. When you really get this, when you really internalize this, everything gets easier. You stop wasting energy on jealousy and envy. You stop feeling threatened by other people's success. You stop diminishing yourself to make others feel comfortable. You can celebrate others without feeling diminished. You can learn from others without feeling inadequate. You can be inspired by others without feeling inferior. Let me tell you about collaboration. People who don't know their worth are threatened by collaboration because they're afraid that others will outshine them or get credit for their ideas. But people who know their worth actively seek collaboration because they understand that working with other talented people multiplies their impact. They're not worried about someone stealing their shine because they know they have their own light. They're not concerned about getting credit because they're more interested in creating results than in getting recognition. This is one of the great paradoxes of success. The more secure you are in your own worth, the more generous you can be with others. The more confident you are in your own value, the more you can champion others. The clearer you are about your own purpose, the more you can support others in finding theirs. It's people who doubt their own significance who need to tear others down. It's people who question their own worth who need to compete and compare. But when you know your worth, you have bandwidth to help others discover theirs. You have capacity to invest in their growth. You have the emotional resources to celebrate their victories. Because you understand that their success doesn't diminish yours. Their achievement doesn't diminish your potential. Their recognition doesn't reduce your value. Now let's talk about seasons, because this is important. Your worth is constant, but your circumstances change. You'll go through seasons of abundance and seasons of scarcity. You'll experience seasons of recognition and seasons of obscurity. You'll face seasons of opportunity and seasons of limitation, but your worth remains the same through all of it. This is crucial to understand because many people tie their sense of worth to their current circumstances. When things are going well, they feel valuable. When things are difficult, they feel worthless. When they're successful, they feel significant. When they're struggling, they feel invisible. But that's not how it works. Your circumstances are temporary. Your worth is permanent. Think about a farmer. In winter, the fields look dead. Nothing is growing. Nothing is producing. But does that mean the soil has lost its value? Of course not. The soil is just as fertile in winter as it is in summer. It's just waiting for the right season. The same is true for you. Just because you're in a season where things aren't blooming doesn't mean you've lost your value. It just means you're in a different season. Some of you are in a winter season right now. Things feel hard. Progress feels slow. Growth feels impossible. And you're starting to question whether you have what it takes, whether you're good enough, whether you're worthy of the dreams you carry. But I'm here to tell you, your season doesn't determine your worth. Your winter doesn't mean you're worthless. It means you're being prepared for spring. Every successful person I've ever studied has gone through seasons that looked like failure. Seasons where nothing worked. Seasons where doors closed. Seasons where it seemed like they were moving backward instead of forward. But the ones who eventually broke through understood something critical. They didn't let temporary seasons define their permanent worth. They kept investing in themselves. They kept developing their skills. They kept preparing for opportunity because they knew that seasons change, but value remains. Here's something else about seasons. Different seasons require different strategies. In winter, you don't try to harvest, you prepare. In spring, you don't rest, you plant. In summer, you don't conserve energy, you grow. In fall, you don't start new projects, you harvest. Each season has its purpose, and fighting against the season you're in is exhausting and futile. So many people are trying to harvest in winter or rest in summer, and they wonder why they're frustrated and unfulfilled. They're trying to force outcomes that aren't aligned with their season. But when you know your worth, you can trust the season you're in. You can do the work that's appropriate for this moment without panicking about what's not happening yet. You can be patient with the process because you trust that your value will eventually be recognized and rewarded. Let me talk about failure for a minute, because this is where a lot of people lose sight of their worth. They fail at something and they conclude that they are a failure. They make a mistake and they decide they are a mistake. They fall short and they believe they are inadequate. But failure is not an identity, it's an event. Failure is something that happens, not something you are. The most successful people in the world have failed more than most people have even tried. They've been rejected, criticized, humiliated, bankrupted, divorced, fired, and ridiculed. But they didn't let those experiences define their worth. They let those experiences refine their approach. They learned from failure instead of being destroyed by it. They use setbacks as setups for comebacks. Here's what I know about failure. It's information. It tells you what doesn't work so you can try something that does. It reveals weaknesses so you can strengthen them. It exposes gaps so you can fill them. It creates humility so you can grow. But it doesn't, and it never will, determine your worth as a person. Think about Thomas Edison. He failed thousands of times before creating a working light bulb. But he didn't see those as failures. He saw them as discoveries of what didn't work. His worth wasn't tied to his outcomes. His worth was tied to his persistence, his creativity, his commitment to solving problems. And that worth was present in every single attempt, not just the one that finally succeeded. Your worth is not performance-based. Let me say that again because it's one of the most important things I can tell you. Your worth is not performance-based. You don't earn it. it. You can't lose it. It's not something you achieve, it's something you acknowledge. You are worthy simply because you exist, because you are a human being with inherent dignity and value. Now, your income might be performance-based. Your recognition might be performance-based. Your opportunities might be performance-based. But your worth, that's a constant. And when you separate your worth from your performance, you free yourself to take risks, to experiment, to fail without fear, to try things that might not work out. Because your identity isn't on the line every time you attempt something. Let's talk about investment, because this is where knowing your worth becomes extremely practical. When you know you're valuable, you invest in yourself. You invest in education because you believe you're worth developing. You invest in health because you believe you're worth maintaining. You invest in growth because you believe you're worth improving. You invest in experiences because you believe you're worth enriching. But people who don't know their worth don't invest in themselves. They spend money on things instead of development. They waste time on entertainment instead of education. They neglect their health because they don't believe they're worth the effort. They settle for comfort instead of pursuing growth. And then they wonder why they're not progressing, why they're not growing, why they're stuck in the same place year after year. Here's a principle. You get in life what you're willing to settle for. If you're willing to settle for low-quality relationships, that's what you'll have. If you're willing to settle for low-paying work, that's what you'll do. If you're willing to settle for poor health, that's what you'll experience. But if you raise your standards, if you increase your expectations, if you demand more from yourself and for yourself, life rises to meet you there. Raising your standards isn't about being demanding or difficult. It's about honoring your worth. It's about recognizing that you deserve better than you've been accepting. It's about understanding that settling for less than you're capable of is actually doing everyone a disservice, yourself most of all. I want to address something that's particularly relevant in today's world: the difference between self-worth and self-esteem. Self-esteem is how you feel about yourself. It goes up and down based on circumstances, feedback, and outcomes. Self-worth is your fundamental belief about your value as a person. It's stable, consistent, and not dependent on external factors. Many people are chasing self-esteem when what they really need is self-worth. They're looking for the next accomplishment, the next compliment, the next achievement to make them feel good about themselves. But self-esteem based on external validation is fragile. It crumbles the moment the validation stops. Self-worth, on the other hand, is solid. It doesn't need constant reinforcement because it's rooted in something deeper than circumstances or opinions. When you build your life on self-worth rather than self-esteem, you become unshakable. Criticism doesn't devastate you because your worth isn't up for debate. Failure doesn't destroy you because your value isn't performance-based. Rejection doesn't define you because your significance isn't dependent on someone else's acceptance. Now, I know some of you are thinking, this all sounds good, but how do I actually get there? How do I move from not knowing my worth to knowing it? Let me give you some practical steps. First, identify the lies you've believed about yourself. Write them down. I'm not smart enough. I'm not attractive enough. I'm not talented enough. I'm too old. I'm too young. I'm too damaged. Whatever the lies are, get them on paper where you can see them. Second, challenge those lies with truth. For every lie you've identified, find evidence that contradicts it. Find proof that it's not true. Look for examples from your own life that demonstrate the opposite. Most of the time, you'll find that what you believe was absolute truth was actually just an opinion or an interpretation that you accepted without questioning. Third, surround yourself with truth tellers. Find people who see your value and aren't afraid to remind you of it when you forget. These aren't people who flatter you or tell you what you want to hear. These are people who see your potential and call it out. These are people who believe in you even when you don't believe in yourself. Fourth, practice doing things that scare you. Every time you do something that feels risky or uncomfortable, you're sending yourself a message. I am brave, I am capable, I am worth taking chances on. Those actions build evidence that contradicts the lies you've believed. They create a new story about who you are and what you're capable of. Fifth, serve others. This might seem counterintuitive, but one of the fastest ways to recognize your own worth is to see the impact you have on others. When you use your gifts to help someone, when you solve a problem for someone, when you encourage someone who's struggling, you get immediate feedback about your value. You see that you have something worth giving. Let me tell you what happens when people truly grasp their worth. Their relationships improve because they stop accepting treatment that dishonors them. Their careers advance because they start advocating for themselves and pursuing opportunities that match their capabilities. Their health improves because they start treating their bodies like the valuable assets they are. Their finances improve because they stop settling for less than their worth and start creating value that commands appropriate compensation. But beyond all of that, something even more profound happens. They start living with purpose. They start pursuing meaning. They start making choices based on values rather than fear. They start creating a legacy rather than just making a living. Because when you know you're valuable, you want to do something valuable with your life. This is the ultimate expression of knowing your worth. Using what you've been given to create something that matters. Not for recognition, not for applause, not for rewards, though those things may come, but because you understand that you have a responsibility to make your contribution. You have a responsibility to share your gifts. You have a responsibility to use your time wisely. You have a responsibility to leave things better than you found them. In closing, I want to leave you with this thought. Your worth is not something you need to prove. It's something you need to recognize. It's already there. It's always been there. It will always be there. The question is not whether you're valuable. The question is whether you're going to live like you're valuable. So I'm asking you today to make a decision. Decide right now that you're going to start honoring your worth. Decide that you're going to stop settling for less than you deserve. Decide that you're going to invest in yourself like you matter. Decide that you're going to set boundaries like your peace is precious. Decide that you're going to pursue opportunities like your contribution counts. Decide that you're going to build a life that reflects your actual value rather than someone else's limited perception of it. Because here's the truth. The world needs what you have to offer. There are problems that need your solutions. There are people who need your gifts. There are opportunities that need your unique combination of skills and experiences and perspectives. But none of that happens until you first recognize that you are worth developing, worth protecting, worth investing in, and worth sharing. Know your worth, not in an arrogant way, not in a boastful way, but in an honest, accurate, grounded way. Know that you have value. Know that you have something to contribute. Know that you deserve to be treated with dignity and respect. Know that you're capable of more than you've settled for. Know that your best days are still ahead of you if you're willing to step into them. Your life will never exceed your belief about yourself. Your circumstances will never surpass your sense of worth. Your outcomes will never transcend your self-image. So if you want different results, start with a different belief. If you want better circumstances, start with a better sense of worth. If you want superior outcomes, start with an improved self-image. This is your moment. This is your opportunity. This is your chance to finally see yourself the way you deserve to be seen, as valuable, as capable, as worthy of everything you've been dreaming about but have been too afraid to pursue. Know your worth, and then live like you know it.